I recently just came back from an awesome Disney World trip with my family, and my son got addicted to pin collecting. So I had to make a pin banner for him when we got home. Turns out he had a lot more pins at home that I did not know about, so we've got a mixture of Pokemon pins and some Disney and Universal pins on here and some random pins. But I loved making this project, and if you have anyone in your life that loves to collect pins, I highly recommend making this project. So let's jump on in and start getting sewing.
You will need 2 pieces of fabric, one for the front and one for the back. You can use fat quarters for this. I used an orange piece of fabric and a nice red Mickey fabric. You can easily make this the exact same fabric if you don't care to have the front and back looking different. And then a scrap piece of fabric for your top loop. You will also need some fusible fleece. Now for myself, I have a whole bunch of scrap pieces of my fusible fleece, and I am going to be sewing these together using my Franken batting method, which I do have a tutorial for and will link to in the description down below. Then you will need a dowel. Now you can go to the hardware store, buy a cheap dowel and cut it down to the exact size you want, or you can go on Amazon and buy these nice banner bars. This one is an old one that I got from my grandmother. So I will link to a few options in the description down below, but you will want to make sure that they are the correct length. To start off, you will take your fabric that you want for the front and for the back of your banner, and you will cut them 21 inches tall by 14.5 inches wide. And then you will cut your fusible fleece the exact same size, so 21 inches tall by 14.5 inches wide. As you can see here, I have 3 pieces sewn together, and that's my Franken batting method, which I will link to in the description down below. Next, you will attach your fusible fleece to one of your outer layers of fabric, and of course do this following the instructions that come with your fusible fleece. And once you've attached your fusible fleece to that outer layer, now it is time to find the center of the bottom part to your banner. So for myself, I just fold my fabric in half and then draw a little marked line, but I must admit I should have folded the back piece of fabric in half to find that middle line, not my fusible fleeced side, because it did in the end put a crease in there that I did not like. Once you've found the center of the bottom part of your banner, just draw a little marked line so that you know exactly where it is. And then from the bottom up, you will need to draw a mark at 5 inches from that bottom corner up. Then you will be able to draw a line from that 5-inch mark down to that center point mark that we marked earlier. You'll do this on both bottom edges. And then you can trim away the excess fabric following the marked lines that you've drawn, and you are starting to see the banner take shape. Next, lay your other backing fabric on top and trim away as well. I like to do it this way, that way everything looks exactly the same. And now that your front fabric and your backing fabric have taken on the shape of a banner, you will lay them right sides together and then pin around the entire outer edge. Next, you will sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance along the long edge and then down towards the point and then to the other side and up along the next long edge. But you are going to leave that top portion that you see unpinned here. You will not be sewing along that edge. Start and stop with a back stitch. And this is what that will look like once sewn. Now, before we turn our project right side out, we want to trim away those bottom points. So we've got 3 points on the bottom there, and just trim close to that seam allowance, but make sure, of course, not to snip into your seam allowance. Then turn your project right side out, and I like to use a chopstick just to gently nudge out all of those points. Make sure not to push too hard or else you might pop out that seam. And then take it to your iron and give it a nice press so that everything is nice and flat.
Now we are almost done sewing our project, but I did want to interrupt myself here to ask you to please hit that thumbs up button if you like this sewing project. That tells YouTube to share my video with others that might enjoy it as well. And of course, hit that subscribe button so you don't lose me on YouTube. All right, let's get back to it.
And now to make the loop, you will need to cut a piece of fabric out of your scraps at 13.5 inches wide by 4 inches tall. Then take that piece of fabric and fold both of the outer edges in 1/2 inch and then fold them in one more time 1/2 inch. So as you can see here, this is the finished product where both of the edges have been folded in 1/2 inch and 1/2 inch, and then I just sewed along that inner edge. Then fold this in half and just give it a nice press. Now we need to prep our banner piece so that we'll be able to add the loop into it. So that top open edge you will take to your iron and you will press the entire top edge down 1/2 inch and just press it in place. I use this little measuring gauge as I go along to make sure that I am doing 1/2 inch. Now, since you're working with one side being a bit thicker with the fusible fleece, once I press it down that 1/2 inch, I will clip it in place and let it cool so that it can stay folded down as best as it can. Just throw some clips along the top while you do this. Then what you can do is just make sure both sides line up evenly. And now we need to find the half mark. So measure from one edge into the center 6 3/4 inches. That will help you find the half mark, and then just draw a tiny little marking with a water-soluble marking pen. You will also need to find the halfway point on your loop itself. So on that loop, the blue fabric here, I just fold it in half and I just finger press it, and that allows me to know exactly where the half mark is on my loop. Another thing that you can do, and this is optional, is you can take your loop and with, again, a water-soluble marking tool pencil, you can draw a line 1/2 inch up from the raw edge of your loop. That will just allow you to have a line that you can follow when you're trying to tuck it into the banner. And now it's time to remove those clips that are holding your banner in place, and you will line up the center marking on your banner with the center marking on your loop, and then you will just slide it in place 1/2 inch into your project, pin it in place, and then it will be time to sew. As you can see here, I've kept my clips on the two outer edges of my banner because I want those points to lay flat, and my loop is nicely tucked in place and pinned in place. Then take this to your sewing machine and sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance around your entire outer edge of the banner. Don't forget to start and stop with a backstitch. And this is what your project will look like at this point in the process. I do have one more stitch I want to show you to do, but first I just want to show you, if you look along the top of my banner here on the orange side, I got pretty close to that top edge. And that's because I wasn't really doing a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I was more doing an 1/8 inch seam allowance. So I got a little close to that top edge. So just be aware that the side that you're not seeing, you may end up getting closer and miss it. So make sure you're doing that 1/4 inch seam. And now to make your banner look a little extra special, what I recommend is sewing another 1/4 inch seam inside the other seam. So I use a 1/4 inch sewing foot, which I will link to in the description down below. And that allows me to follow my first seam and go all the way around with my second seam. That way it's exactly a 1/4 inch in from the previous seam. And I just think it gives a really nice look. And this is your banner, nicely sewn up and ready to be pinned once we add that dowel and rope. So, like I said before, you can use one of these nice little dowels you can find at your hardware store. You can cut it exactly down to size, and then you can add your rope, or if you want, you can add one of these little bars here. Like I said, this one is an old one I got from my grandmother, but you can find these still on Amazon, which I think is really cool. Just make sure you are buying a length that will work for your banner. You can always widen this project or lengthen this project to make the banner specific to your needs. But once you put your rod on through, then it is time to add your rope. Now again, in the description down below, you will find a link to the rope that I'm using here. If you use rope that's too thick, then it's hard to tie a knot around your dowel. So just know that the thicker the rope, the harder it's going to be. So all I do is I tie a knot on the one end. I don't have a measurement for how much rope I used because I just looped it around to the other side before I cut the rope. Visually saw how much rope I might need as far as where I might want that point to be. Cut a little extra off, tied it to the other side, and then I snipped the excess rope away after the fact.
And just like that, you have made an adorable banner. But I do have a question for you. And my question is, if you do enjoy pin collecting, what is your all-time favorite pin you have ever collected? I have one. Actually, I want to show it to you. I will be right back. All right, my all-time favorite pin that I will never give up is this one here. I got this one in Disney World this year for celebrating our 20th anniversary. We took the kids there to celebrate 20 years, and we had a blast. Let me know in those comments what your favorite pin is that you have, and I hope that you guys have a wonderful day. Happy sewing, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.